In this video, what I want to do is create a square on the canvas that I can click on and have some event happen. I'll probably change the background from white to black or something simple like that. So I'm in the P5 editor. I'm actually going to do this as a class. You don't really need to do it like this, but I'll do it this way because you'll be able to use it in your projects, in your classes. You'll find this a more useful demo if I do it this way. So first thing I'm going to do is sketch add file, and I'm going to call it clickable.js. And once I do that, if I open up the project folder, I should be able to see that clickable.js on the left hand side, and I'll need to link that into my sketch. So here, if I copy this line and just change sketch.js to clickable.js there, that's now linked into the sketch. Right, so this is going to have all of my clickable stuff. This is going to have all of my sketch stuff. Let's define the class. So the syntax for a class is class, the keyword class, and then the name of the class, clickable in this case, and then curly brackets. And everything that defines the class goes in between these curly brackets. Watch the lecture recording for lecture 9 and review the lecture notes, for the lecture for week 7 to see the lecture on creating objects. Or else you can review the tutorial 9. So first thing we need to do is create a constructor function. The constructor function is the function that creates the object. So this is going to need to know an x and a y position for the clickable and a width and a height. Basically, I'm just going to draw a rectangle, and I'm going to store each of those things inside the clickable object with the this dot. So I'm going to say this dot x equals x, this dot y equals y, this dot w equals w, and this dot h equals h. So width, height, and x and y. Then I'm going to want to make a show function. So I'm going to say show, doesn't need any arguments, and I'm going to say rect x, y, it should be this dot x, this dot y, this dot w, and this dot h. I'll come back and add some comments in a second. That is worth doing, but for now I just want to see that this is working the way I think. So if I go back to my sketch.js, at the top I'm going to say let clicker, and here in the setup I'm going to say clicker equals new clickable, and my canvas is 400 wide and 400 high, so I'm going to put this somewhere in the middle. Now if I sort of think about what I want this to do, let's look on this sort of little sketch I've made. Basically what I want to do is draw it in the middle of the screen, and if you click inside it, it's going to return true, or it's going to cause something to happen. And if you click outside it, it's going to be returning false, so nothing's going to happen. And this is 400 wide and 400 high. So if I want this to be somewhere in the middle, probably if I make that about 100 big, so a 100 by 100 rectangle or a 100-sided square right in the middle of the page. So that means the top left of that is going to be, this point's going to be 200, so it's going to come back 50 and up 50. So this point here is going to be 150, 150. That's the XY position. So the XY is going to be 150, 150, and it's going to be 100 wide and 100 high. Right, that's my new clickable, and then in the draw function I'm going to say clicker.show. Let's run that and see that it works. Yeah, so I've got my clicker showing up in the middle of the page. That's this little square. So now what I want to do is when the user clicks on the screen, I want to get this thing of true or false happening, right? So in the main sketch, I'll make a mouse handler, and I'm going to say function mouse pressed, And this will get called any time that the mouse is actually clicked, like when the actual click of the mouse happens. I'm just going to pass the function on, in effect, to the clicker function. So I'm going to say clicker.mousePressed. And I'm going to pass in the mouse X and the mouse Y. Now we're going to have to define this method in the Clickable class, so let's go back there. And we're going to have a mouse pressed method, which is going to accept an X and a Y. And basically what we want to check is this X and this Y within the boundaries of the X and the Y and the width and the height of the clicker. So let's go back to our piece of paper and sort of sketch this out. If that's my clicker and this is my X value and this is my width and that's my Y value and this is my height, when I get a mouse X, mouse Y, if it's inside the square, that means the mouse X is larger than the X of the clickable, but not so large that it's more than the X plus the width. So if my mouse X is over here, then it's not clicked inside, it's clicked off to one side of it. Same for the Y, that has to be greater than the Y value, but not so great that it's down here below the bottom of the clicker. So we need to sort of check that it's inside these boundaries, and basically we'll do that with two if statements. So if I say if, and just for clarity I'm going to call this mx and my, just for mouse X and mouse Y. If mx is greater than this dot x, that has to be true, right? And at the same time, mx has to be less than this dot x plus this dot w. So that has to be true. And, so I'll start a new line here, and I can say and my has to be greater than this dot y, and my has to be less than this dot y plus this dot h. Right? So if all of that is true, it is only clicked if all of these conditions are true. So if all of that's true, let's have a variable and I'll call it isClicked or wasClicked. Right, so by default I'll set that to false, but if all of this is true, I'm going to set it to true as well. Was clicked equals true. And then at the end here I can just return was clicked. So I'm going to do something more interesting eventually, but for now I just want to return the value of was clicked and just see that it's all working. So if I go back to my sketch, here I've got clicker mouse pressed, and I'm going to store the value that this method returns in this variable. I can use the same name, was clicked, and I'm just going to console log that. So console.log was clicked. Let's run that and see what happens. Okay, so I click on it, I get true in the console. See down here? If I click outside, I get false. So if I click below, I get false. To the right, to the top, to the left, up here, up here. It's a good idea when you're testing things out, not just to click, in one place or test it in one condition, but to sort of think about the variations. And if I click back inside again, I get true there at the bottom. So that seems to be working. All right, now let's use this to do something slightly more interesting. I mean, I could already use this to, like, when that's true, I could trigger some other event in my sketch, but I think what I might do is have the clickable store its store whether it was clicked or not. I'm not sure if this is the best way to do it, but I'm going to say this dot was clicked and make that a variable and set that to be false by default. And I'm going to get rid of this, and instead I'm going to say clicker.wasClicked. So this dot was clicked, it becomes a property of the object, and we can read that in our sketch. So here in the sketch.js, when I say console.log clicker.wasClicked, I'm just accessing that property on the clicker object. So rather than having a variable here, I can actually just store that value inside the object. So I could say this dot was clicked equals was clicked. So this is a little bit tricky here because we've got a variable called was clicked and then a property on the object called was clicked as well. Don't be confused. This is not the same was clicked as this one up here. To get to this one, we have to put this dot. Okay, so that's why I need to have this dot here. So this is like a temporary variable that only lasts for as long as this method call, this function call, and it'll go away as soon as mouse pressed ends. But the one with this dot, that gets stored inside the object for as long as the object is alive, if you like. So here I'm storing that value. All right, so I'm storing that value in the clicker, and now I should be able to console log clicker.wasClicked, and we'll get the same thing. We'll get true and then false. So that's working. So now, finally, you know, it's actually a bit funny here to make a variable and then set it to true inside an if statement, because if you think of it, this statement is either true or false. Like this statement, if that's true, I want was clicked to be true, and if this is false, I want was clicked to be false. So an easier way to write all of this is actually to say this dot was clicked equals all of that. I'll just put a semicolon on the end. I can get rid of all of this, and I can get rid of this little variable. Yep. True, true, false, false, false. All right, so we've got a little button here now that when it gets clicked on, it remembers that the value that it was clicked, and then that means we can use that in our sketch. So if I go back to my sketch, I could do something like in the drawer. Well, firstly, what I could do is I could say here in the clicker.show, I could use the was clicked to change the color. So let's use that. So in the clickable, I can say if this dot was clicked, I could set the fill to something different. So fill 25500, else fill 255. That means that the little clickable is going to go red when after it's been clicked on, or white if it's been something else has been clicked on. So it's red if it's clicked on, white otherwise. I could also do things like in the sketch itself, I could say if clicker.wasClicked, then I'll set the background to this gray color. But if it wasn't clicked, I'll set the background to a darker gray color. Let's try that. So I've got this dark gray color So you can see that's working now. Let's make that a little bit darker. Okay, so that's an example of a simple clickable object that you could integrate into your sketch in lots of different ways. And I'll build on this simple starting point with some more complex examples in coming videos. Let me know if you have any other questions about or ideas of things that you could do with the clickable class, and I'll think about including a demo on them as well. Thanks.